You're listening to the Bluegrass Jamboree, playing the best in bluegrass, bluegrass gospel, and traditional country. TheBluegrassJamboree.com.
Hello, and welcome to another segment of Hear It Here, heard only on the BluegrassJamboree.com. I'm Brett Smeltzer, your host of Bluegrass Retrospect, which is normally heard every Friday evening. But today, I am honored to be hosting Hear It Here as a welcome on the phone my featured artist and special guest, the legendary Doyle Lawson. Doyle joins me on the phone today as we talk about his latest single from the latest CD, Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver, live in Prague, Czech Republic, recorded on Billy Blue Records. Doyle, it is a pleasure to have you joining me this morning. Welcome to Hear It Here on the BluegrassJamboree.com.
Well, thank you, Brett. It's awfully good to talk to you today. I'm sitting here looking out the window. It's a beautiful day.
Sure is.
We'll get to talk about some bluegrass music. That's right up my alley.
All right, that's great. Mine too. Well, before we go into the interview that I am very anxious to get started, I would like to take a moment and first thank Claire Ratliff of Laughing Penguin Publicity in Nashville, Tennessee, for setting up this interview with Doyle. Also, Jerry Sally and Tiffany Noaker from Billy Blue Records, located in Hendersonville, Tennessee, as well as our fellow DJ and head of operations of the BluegrassJamboree.com, Miss Annette Grady, who has known this for years. I have always told her that it would be monumental if there was ever a day that I could sit down and actually do an interview with Doyle Lawson of Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver. And I thought that day would never come, but here we are.
And here we are.
Yes, sir. And as we speak, my wife has me literally duct taped down to the chair because I feel I should be standing up to talk to you, sir.
Well, not at all.
Okay.
Well, it's a joy to talk with you. We'll visit for a while.
All righty, that's great. You have been playing bluegrass music, I'm just going to say roughly 57 years, starting in 1963. And you've been playing as long as I've been alive.
Well, actually, Brett, I went pro in 1963 around the third day of February.
Yes.
I went to Nashville, but I'd been playing. I started trying to learn to play the mandolin when I was 11 years old. And at the age of 14, there's a fellow that became known as the King of Bluegrass, Jimmy Martin. And my dad had moved us to a little farm over in Hancock County, Tennessee, about 60 miles due west of Kingsport, where I was born, in 1954. In 1958, Jimmy came home for Christmas, and his mom and his folks lived not too far from us, and his brother-in-law that had married his sister lived on the next farm next to ours, and he asked if I would like to meet Jimmy, and I said absolutely. Now that was probably in September, October. I couldn't wait for Christmas to get around, but it came home. I got to meet him. And little did I know that 4 years later I would become the banjo player for Jimmy Martin and the Sunny Mountain Boys.
According to a story that I read, you actually met Jimmy at, was it like 3 o'clock in the morning at a bus depot?
Actually, he called me on Saturday, the first Saturday in February, and he was needing a banjo player because when I met him the first time, I'd been playing mandolin. But I decided back in those days, jobs were pretty scarce, and I looked at my options, and I thought if I learned to play banjo, I might be able to go to Nashville and hook on with maybe Jimmy or Bill if the opportunity came. Bill Monroe, of course. Bill is my mandolin inspiration. So he called and wanted to know if I would come down and audition. And I got there probably in the wee hours of the morning, called out to his house. And Barbara said, yeah, he knows you're coming. So when he calls in, he's out. I'll have him come get you. So it was, I don't know, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'm an 18-year-old kid and never been that far away from home in my life. And I was getting a little anxious because I thought if he doesn't show up, to be honest with you, all I had was my banjo and a little tote bag and not enough money to get a bus back home. I didn't know what I was going to do, but he showed up, I auditioned, got the job, and that's where it all started.
Wow. To give the listeners a brief summary of your recording history, since you were 18 or 19 years old, you have been on 3 albums with Jimmy Martin and the Sunny Mountain Boys. Later, you were on 3 albums with J.D. Crowe and the Kentucky Mountain Boys, which later became J.D. Crowe and the New South. 8 albums with the Country Gentlemen. In 1977, you backed up U.S. Senator Robert Byrd on his Mountain Fiddler album. In 1977, you released a solo project entitled Tennessee Dream. In 1979, you left the Country Gentlemen to create your own sound. You formed Doyle Lawson and Foxfire. But later, was it the Sugar Hill label that had you change the name to Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver?
It was me.
Oh, okay.
I'll tell you why. When I decided to leave, I looked around, and of course, my roots being in the southeast here in East Tennessee, and right where I'm from, you have Tennessee, Virginia, North Carolina, and Kentucky that connect. And on down, you have Alabama and Georgia. But in the North Georgia mountains, they had a series of books back in those days called the Foxfire books. It's based on the Appalachian traditions and the values of a life that we don't see anymore. But I felt a real connection to that, and so I thought, well, that'd be a good name for a band. Well, this was prior to all the internets, and today, Brett, we have there are no secrets. You can find out anything. Back in 41 years ago, it wasn't quite like that.
Yes, sir.
So all the research I did, I found no one that was using that name until the word got out that I had left the Country Gentlemen and put the band together, and then I began to get phone calls and letters from people, and there probably 8 or 10 groups that were probably more regional than anything, but they were scattered all over. I answered the phone one day, and this lady was almost in tears about the fact that I was going to be using that name. She said, we have been using this name for 6-7 years, whatever it was, and I think she said she was from Kansas or somewhere. But so I told her, I said, ma'am, let me assure you, I'll find another name, because the last thing I want to do is to be mistaken for somebody else. And I didn't mean that in a mean-spirited way. It wasn't that. I just didn't want anybody to confuse me with anybody else, And so I then began to look for another name that would be different, but easy to remember. And I lived in Virginia at the time. I was home visiting my parents. My mother and I, we'd sit in the kitchen. When I went home, my mother was always in the kitchen. And the first thing she'd ask me was I hungry? But we were sitting there and tossing names back and forth. And she said, Quicksilver is a good name. A common definition we use for Quicksilver, that it's a force to be reckoned with. It's unstoppable. Well, that sort of rang a bell with me, and I rolled it around. And by the time I drove back home, the 4 hours or so that I had to go back to Virginia, it felt right. Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver, and that was 40-plus years ago. And to be honest with you, it still feels right.
Wow. Thank God for moms, huh?
Absolutely.
Oh,
absolutely.
Wow.
Well, it's ironic. The first little band I was in when I was a kid, I don't know, 14, 15 years old, and I had 2 cousins, a first cousin and a third cousin. We had a little trio, and basically we played mandolin and sang harmonies, guitar and mandolin, and had a trio. Well, my mother decided we had to have a name, and she said, now y'all are all cousins, so you're going to be the Country Cousins. And that was the first band that I was in.
Wow. Where are those folks now?
Well, they're all deceased. Well, see, I think one of my cousins still lives, but he's quite a bit older than me. But
Gotcha.
My first cousin was so very talented, vocal-wise. He could sing higher than he could sing. He didn't know how high he could sing. I would just tell him to hit that note, and he would hit it. So, but he passed away at a fairly young age.
I'm sorry. And to continue on with your discology, there were 6 albums released with the Bluegrass Album Band on the New Rounder label, which I love all 6 volumes. I think that's one of the best projects put out there today. It's still standing the test of time. 2 albums with Paul Williams and J.D. Crowe, which you put out Standing Tall and Tough. You also put out Old Friends Get Together, and then you put out a Chapter 3, which was just you and Paul Williams.
That was after when J.D. decided to retire. Paul and I did one more after that.
Okay. And then you had 4 compilated albums. Now Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver lays claim on over 40 albums, countless accolades, including multiple International Bluegrass Music Association awards for Vocal Group of the Year, as well as 7 Grammy nominations, including a Grammy nomination in 2019 for this live album, live in Prague, Czech Republic. And that was as of the 62nd Annual Grammy Awards.
Yes.
What a history. What a lot of music under your belt.
Well, It's been quite a ride, I got to tell you, and
Right.
I tell people I'm a blessed man. I got to do what I love to do. In addition to that, I derive my income from it, and there's a lot of people, Brett, that spend the entire years of their working profession. There's a lot of people that they spend it at a job that they hate, but
Exactly.
they work.
Yes.
Well, I'm so lucky because I tell people I've always had a bit of a restless spirit. I like to be on the move, and so I got to travel. I got to play the music I love, and I love people. I love talking with people, and the good Lord blessed me beyond belief, and far more than I know that I deserve. Yeah, I'll share one quick story about
Sure.
the
Absolutely.
travel thing. Well, I went to work for Jimmy in 1963. That was at the start, and I was gone for 6 years. So in '69, I went back to work for Jimmy, and I had driven all night. We left Nashville, going to Pennsylvania or New Jersey or up in New England. But anyway, I'd driven all night, and I laid down in that old bus he was driving. It had a 1948 Flex model bus, and but I slept about an hour, and I got up, and Jimmy looked up. He said, "What are you doing up?" And I said, "Well, I'll be honest with you, I've never been up in this part of the country, and I want to see what it looks like." And he started laughing. He looked at his son. He said, "The road life will never hurt you." I said, "Why do you say that?" He said, "Because you love it." And he said, "If you don't like to travel, this is not the business you
Right.
want to be in."
Absolutely. I'm going to jog your memory back a little bit, Doyle. You acquired your first mandolin from your father, correct? Your father borrowed that from a group he was in?
My dad sang in an a cappella quartet.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't professional, would have never even thought of it. They sing gospel music, quartet music, because they love to sing, and they believed in what they were singing about.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just one of those mountain quartet. Although they could read the old shape note music, in fact, is when I was a little fella, I went when my dad was studying to read shape notes. I'd go with him and to watch. I was too little to know what they were doing, but anyway. But he was singing, and there was a fellow in the quartet. His name was Willis Ferd, and I found out that he had a mandolin, and I asked my dad to see if I could borrow it, and he did. So that was the one I learned to play on. I gave it back to him after I was able to get up enough money to buy a little old cheap $10 mandolin for myself. When I put my band together in '79, in the fall of that year, I did a show at the Hancock County High School where one time I'd go to high school. That's where I went to school. And, I was so proud they gave me the key to the city, and Willis brought that mandolin out and gave it to me because I'd given it back to him.
Wow.
He said he bought it for $15 in 1946 when he came out of the Army. And so, anyway, it was in pretty bad shape, and I had a friend of mine to restore it. Well, to get to the point, that little mandolin that I learned to play on is now over in Owensboro, Kentucky, at the IBMA Bluegrass Hall of Fame and Museum.
Whoa. I would love to see a picture of that. That's awesome. Do you remember the very first song you actually learned to play on that mandolin?
Well, actually, the first night I got it, and another funny little story. It was a Saturday night, and we were having a revival at the little Missionary Baptist church that we attended. Well, he brought the mandolin, and I took it to the car, my dad's car. And when I started putting it in the car, it started raining pretty hard. Well, I used that as an excuse not to go into the church. And I picked me out a little melody, just made it up out of my head, and I picked it out and using two fingers. And I was really proud of the fact that I could already play a little bit of that mandolin. Well, my dad came to the car, and he was not the one least bit impressed. He said, "I don't care what you learn. The next time that door closes for church service, you better be in a seat." So anyway, but the first tune that I remember learning to play, there was a couple of brothers called the Bailey brothers, David and Charlie Bailey. They had been on the Opry once, and they were also members of the WWVA Jamboree in Wheeling for a time. But mostly, they'd come back to East Tennessee. They were nearby where we lived. But they had a song that I later recorded with J.D. Crowe called "Down Where the River Bends." Mm-hmm. We had Red Allen and Crowe and myself, but they did it faster. That was the first real song that I learned to play the melody on. was Down Where the River Bends.
Great tune.
It is.
I have heard in other interviews or even articles in regards to you, Bill Monroe was your inspiration because you had heard him on the Grand Ole Opry on the radio. If you want to share a little story about that, and then I have a question to follow that.
Yeah, we were still in living in Kingsport, right here in the Tri-Cities area. I don't know if you're familiar with the Tri-Cities area of Tennessee, but it's, Kingsport, Bristol, and Johnson City are all within 20 miles of each other. But Kingsport was where I was born, just outside of Kingsport. And although I live in Bristol these days, I came back in '84 and settled in Bristol. But anyway, we had the Opry on like a lot of families did on Saturday night. Most of the time we got a pretty good signal, and I became aware. I'm sure I'd heard it before, but I couldn't have been more than 5 years old. But I heard this music, and I asked my mother who that was, and she told me it was Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys, and he played mandolin, and that he could sing really high. And I said, well, I want to do that when I grow up.
Wow.
And I never changed my mind. I mean, when I was trying to learn to play mandolin, I wanted to be Bill. You know?
Right.
And I tried to play everything like him. But as I began to learn to play mandolin and mature as a musician, I realized that there's only one Bill Monroe.
Yes, sir.
And God made us all a little different, and that's the beauty of the whole thing, you know. And I guess in addition to that, I probably have always been wanting to think for myself. And somebody asked me about how I came about the style of mandolin that I play. I said, well, let me tell you about style. Style is what you feel in your heart and inside you that you project through your instrument. You play what you feel, and that determines what it is. I've never thought about. I've never sat down and said, I'm gonna create something that's different. I just play what I feel.
Prior to Bill Monroe's passing in 1996, did you ever get to meet Bill Monroe?
Oh, yeah. I knew Bill probably close to 30 years, if not more. Yeah, I met him, oddly enough, when I went to Nashville to '63. I didn't get to meet him then because our touring was, we go different places. This was prior to the bluegrass festivals where they would book multiple bluegrass bands on a weekend. You know, this was before all that. So back in the early days, we worked the Opry, and I got to work the WWVA Jamboree, and also I worked the Losing and I Hate Rides with Jimmy in Shreveport. But then we would tour. It could be a high school. It could be a nightclub. We didn't know what it would be. I mean, I know the first multiple dates that I worked with Jimmy as far as being in one place was a place in Kansas City, Missouri called the Chestnut Inn. And it was basically a country music place. Jimmy had had some success with some songs that he was doing because, back in those days, he had added a drum to it and a snare drum and kind of commercialized it a little bit. And so we started to get a lot of airplay, and he was able to go into places that maybe normally wouldn't book a bluegrass band, but we do tours, and I guess the longest tour I did with him was 33. I think we did 33 one-nighters, and that was true stuff.
Wow.
But anyway, I got to meet Bill a little bit later on after I was working with J.D. Crowe. And once in a while, I never worked for Bill, but I'd go out if we were on the same show, and I'd take a guitar out and sing some of the stuff from way back that he didn't do every day because he liked doing that because I think it was a challenge for him to see if he could remember what he had done in 1951 or whatever it was. But he was my hero. I thought the world of him, and somebody asked me one time, did you know Bill Monroe? How well did you know Bill? I said, well, I'll tell you how I knew Bill as well as Bill would let you know him. He was a great guy. He'd call me up for no reason at all, and if he gets something on his mind, he'd just call me about it or whatever. But in some ways, it may have seemed reserved, but once he got to know you, he opened up quite a bit.
Gotcha. When I was first getting into bluegrass music about 35 years ago, maybe a little longer, I play mandolin too, but we're not going to worry about that. But when I was first getting into bluegrass music, I believe 1984, 1985, my first wife back then when we were dating, she was raised on bluegrass music. Her dad and his brothers, they were like second generation sawmillers, but for like their leisure time, they all played. Her dad played mandolin. I've seen some old pictures of him back in his younger days. It looked like an old F4 that he had at the time. I don't even know what brand it was. And he was a huge fan of your music. Before that, I never heard of Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver. So I was listening to the likes of Ricky Skaggs when he was first country, or when I knew him in country. I had no idea about Ricky Skaggs' bluegrass background. But I was just turned on with the mandolin and the fiddle and the banjo that he was incorporating in his chart-topping hits. But my wife had told me, you want to really hear something, you should get a Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver album. So it wasn't until later when I come across one of your albums, I didn't even know about the previous 3 that you had released with the first lineup, and then you also brought in Randy Graham. But the first time I heard of Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver, it was the album Beyond the Shadows. And when you had first on board Russell Moore, Scott Vestal, Curtis Vestal, when I first heard this gospel bluegrass on this album, to me it seemed like it was a different style of bluegrass. Correct me if I'm wrong, I interpret it as contemporary bluegrass, not traditional style, on that album. But I was like, when my time goes and I go to heaven, if there's a music of my choice that I want to hear for eternity, it's this right here. I was just floored with that sound, and I have been hooked on the music of Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver ever since. So I can thank my first wife for that, and her dad for being a bluegrass influence. Did you know that gospel bluegrass would have such an impact on your audience?
I did not. Here's the deal. I knew that I had pretty much fulfilled my purpose for being with the country gentleman, 7.5, almost 8 years, and I gave 110% the whole time. But there was something else that I needed to do. It was time for me to leave, and it took me a while because the guys were great. It was not anything other than I had this calling inside me telling me that I need to move on and to try some other stuff. And I went into this thing. I didn't have a blueprint, a step-by-step procedure. I mean, it was one of those things I stepped out on faith. And the stipulations I made to Jimmy Haley and Terry Balcom and Lou Reed, I said, I want to be a band of multi-colors, so to speak. If we want to do a straight down the middle, hard-driving bluegrass traditional song, let's do it. If we want to do a little bit of contemporary, let's do it. If we want to step on the edge a little bit, let's do it. And I don't want to be one-dimensional where we're afraid to try something else because people say, oh, that's not what you do. But I said, above all, the one thing I want to have a quartet like the one my dad had when I was growing up. That was the one real hard stipulation I made. And we sang continuously. And of all the rehearsing we did, I'd say probably 80% of that rehearsing we would do gospel music. I began to remember a lot of those songs that I heard Dad sing with the quartet he sang with. And I loved it, and a lot of it I could remember. And I thought, as much as I love this kind of music, surely somebody out there will like it. But I had no idea that it would have the effect that it did. But so I recorded the first album with secular, and it was well received. So I called the record company and I said, I want to do a gospel album. And he said, oh, it's way too early for that. No, let's wait, do a couple, 3 more, and then we'll talk about it. And I said, no, I want to do a gospel album because you're not out there and you're not seeing and hearing what I do. And the way I became aware of that, Brett, was the fact that early on, that's to do back in those days, the Sunday morning gospel at the festivals. And we were asked to do one of those, and we started to the stage, and Jimmy had his guitar, and I had my mandolin, and nothing else. Somebody asked Terry, so where's your banjo? He said, well, I'm not going to need it right now. So we go to the stage with the guitar and the mandolin and the quartet. We proceeded to do about an hour of mandolin guitar quartet and a cappella. Well, about 15 minutes into that program, I looked, and the stage sat at the bottom of the hill, and I looked at the top of the hill, and I do believe that probably every musician that was there was standing at the top of the hill watching what was going on.
Wow.
And the people just went, they just absolutely were raving about it. So that gave me the determination and the confidence to make my second album, all gospel, and it's called Rock My Soul. That album sold better than 500,000 copies. It did quite well. At the same time, I was apprehensive. I thought, boy, if this thing doesn't work, I don't know what you're going to do. But as it turned out, It did, and that kind of set a new stage for gospel music and bluegrass. And I'm not saying this in a bragging, boisterous way. I
Right.
don't mean that.
Yes, sir.
It reintroduced and probably brought gospel music and bluegrass even to be more prominent. It's always been a part of our music. You know, gospel, you had the Bluegrass Quartet, the Foggy Mountain Boys Quartet. Ralph and Carter had the Clinch Mountain Quartet, and Jimmy had the Sunny Mountain Quartet. But they didn't do it to the degree that I started doing it. And so it became a new thing to do, and I'm glad. I love gospel music. I grew up with it, and I've often said if I could only do one, it would be gospel. I just love singing it.
Well, I am a huge fan of gospel bluegrass music. I love the gospel cuts that you had on several of your albums. I was majorly turned on by the a cappella numbers that you did. And from what I understand, the a cappella numbers actually led you, per the fans' request, to put out an all a cappella album, and which you did, entitled Heaven's Joy Awaits.
Yes.
During that time, you still had Russell Moore, Scott Vestal, and Ray Deaton. And that today is still one of my favorite albums out there in regards to a full a cappella album. It's just awesome.
Mine too, and my peers all told me that nobody's going to listen to that. That nobody wants to hear a whole album of a cappella songs. We'll see. And
Yes, sir.
I will tell you that when I got my quarterly royalty statement, that album sold more by itself the first quarter than all the rest of the things I'd recorded combined.
Wow.
So,
Yep. Oh, yeah.
but it's still, I just love that kind of music. Let's fast forward. I got the idea. I called Barry Poss, who owned Sugar Hill Records. I said, I'm going to the studio. I'm going to cut a gospel recording, and I'm just going to use guitar, and I'm going to do it live. He said, what? I said, I am. I'm not going to do overdubs and tracks. I'm going to do it live. I want to recreate some of the days that I remembered turning the radio on and hearing this music, and now here are, for the next half hour, we present whatever quartet it was, and they would maybe strum a guitar and sing a little theme song, and I was trying to get that feel back, and a lot of people said, yeah, that won't work. You got, what about the bleed? What about this and all that? And so I went in the studio, and we did an LP or a CD called Gospel Radio Gems. And I had a friend of mine, Harold Mitchell, who had been a DJ, radio man about all his life. I had him to do that introduction. And then I set up 2 mics in the studio. I had my bass singer, Dale Perry. I put him on a separate mic so I wouldn't lose the low notes, because sometimes when you're in a quartet, the tenor singer if he has to bear down a little bit to reach it, if you're not careful, he might cover up the bass singer who's doing the low part, So I put him on a separate mic so I could control that. The trio, Barry Scott, Barry Abernathy, and me, and my guitar was on the other mic. And that's how we recorded that. No overdubs, nothing. We went through, everything was live.
Raw sound.
Yes.
Yes, sir. We're going to move forward just a little bit, Doyle. I had the opportunity to meet you twice. I'm sure you recall the Berryville Bluegrass Concert Series, Frank Journey, who we sadly lost here just recently.
Yeah.
I've never had bluegrass so close to my home. This venue was only 12 miles away from my house. At the time, it was at the Johnson Williams Middle School. Well, it was Clark County High School, but Johnson Williams Middle School. And I met you for the first time, got to meet you, got to talk to you. The first time I met you, I got the DVD, which was your 25 years of Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver through the years.
Right.
And then the second time that I got to meet you, I actually got to meet you at the new high school, got to talk to you. But I think the coolest thing that you had done was you put out the DVD, Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver Through the Years, where you held a live concert. If anybody out there is not aware of it, it's still available on Amazon.com, I believe. You held a live concert and you featured all of the members of Quicksilver, starting from the original lineup to the current lineup. I had that DVD. I about wore it out, but I think I lent it out to somebody and now can't find it.
It was either 2003, 2004.
There were members that you mentioned throughout the DVD that couldn't make it for circumstances beyond their control. But to visually walk through 25 years of songs and the personnel that you had through those years, from the earlier to the current albums at that time.
Yeah.
How hard was it to reach out to the prior members of Quicksilver to make that recording date and event happen?
Well, the schedule was the hardest thing.
Gotcha.
And I will tell you this. My approach to them was, I said, I'm going to send to you a list of the songs that we'll do. We're not going to rehearse. There'll be no rehearsal. You guys were here a long, long time and refreshed you a little bit, and I want it to be cold. And
Wow.
there was not 1 second of rehearsal at all.
And they pulled it off. Unbelievable.
Oh, yeah. I wanted that magic to be like that, you know,
Mhm.
and I thought it may be a little rough, but I still wanted to be like that. And of course, it put a lot of pressure on them. But the thing is, Brett, the guys that have come through here, I was always blessed with the fact that I was able to find people that worked and lived up to my expectations, and I knew they could do what I wanted to do, and I felt like that when they left here, they took something with them, and that was discipline and pride in what they were doing. And I felt in my heart that if I told them to do it this way, that they would, and by and large, they did. I know the acapella we did with Ray, of course, that was hard when we recorded it. Well, he wasn't quite prepared, but it worked out so good that after he missed a word, I said, well, Ray, if you weren't already gone, I'd have to let you go. Of course, everybody laughed. Well, we just made a positive out of something that might have looked weak, but it wasn't. He said, you know, when you first released a thing like that, it kind of upset me because I didn't want to look bad. But he said, that blame, he said, I'm getting more attention now than I did before. He said, you know, made a star out of it.
That was funny as all get out. That was great.
It was.
Well, what I noticed with this entire DVD, through your Quicksilver lineup, that you have went through constant changes over the years. It doesn't matter. I mean, vocalists sound different. Maybe somebody's style of playing was different, but you managed, and it was proof right there, you managed to maintain the Quicksilver trademark sound, and that's what keeps the folks coming back for more of your music.
You're right. Well, I'm asked quite often, how do you do that? And so it's really pretty simple. I don't change for the people that come in. They have to, if there's any changing to do, they have to adapt to what I'm doing.
Yes, sir.
And I said I learned that early on. When I went to work playing banjo for Jimmy Martin as a kid, my job was instilled in me that I had to play what they were playing, the style that he had established. And the same goes when I went to the Country Gentleman in 1971. Here I'm a southeastern Tennessee boy, and when you get into D.C. area, Charlie had a little bit of a northern accent, and that I had to adapt to. But my job was to go in and change the way I was looking and doing things to fit the Country Gentleman, and that's what I did. So that carried on to when I left, and when people come here and they leave, whoever comes in, they have to be willing to adapt to the style that I've established, because it's 41 years it's worked, and I don't see any reason to try to change it.
You're here to talk about your latest CD, Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver, live in Prague, Czech Republic. What inspired you to want to record this live show in the Czech Republic?
That, for me, and of course Josh Swift, Josh, who was with me at that time, Josh left about half a year ago, but that was my third trip to Prague. Now, Jake Vanover and Jerry Cole had only been with me for a little over a month, but this thing came in. But I'll be honest with you, I had no idea, no intentions of recording a live recording when I got there. But when I did get there, the promoters said, we've got a professional sound recording company here. Would you be willing to record the show and see if we could get a live recording? And she said, we'll pay for it. So I said, I tell you what, we'll do that. And if I like it enough, then we'll bring the files back to the U.S. and we'll work on it, and we'll make it work and give you what we think is a good program, a good CD. But that's the only way I'll do it. And they readily agreed to do that. Well, 2 shows sold out. And we did a matinee show and an evening show. Both of them sold out, and the crowd, they were just very responsive. You got to understand that the Czech Republic, prior to that, was Czechoslovakia. When they got out from behind the curtain, so to speak, and got their freedoms, they're so enthused about everything that they knew that was out there, but they had missed, and music being one of them. And Rostam, the promoter, said when he was a little kid, his dad had managed to get a recording of Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver, and he said he just hoped one day he'd be able to see that. And as it turned out, he was the one booking me there.
Oh,
but anyway,
wow.
I had no idea that we would do it. After we got back, when we finished up, the furthest thing from my mind was a Grammy nomination. To get a live CD, to be what I call radio friendly, takes a lot of work because you're doing a live show, you're in a big auditorium, you've got the room ambience that you got to deal with, the music swimming around to a degree. You've got to try to harness all that because when you put it on the radio, you're a radio man, Brett. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes, sir.
It has to be pleasing to the ear,
Yes, sir.
especially on the radio. But I owe a debt of thanks to Josh Swift, who worked on it. He mixed it, mastered it, and we got it ready. And lo and behold, the thing turned out to be nominated for a Grammy, and that was the last thing I would have thought about.
Could you, for the listeners, list off who your current lineup is in Quicksilver?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, on banjo is Joe Dean. Joe's been with me, probably 8-9 years at least. Stephen Burwell on the fiddle. He's been here working on 6 years. And Jake Vanover, the guitar player and the vocalist who's singing the lead on Living Like There's No Tomorrow, my first single. He signed on in December of 2018. And Jerry Cole, the bass player, and who is singing my latest single, Leaving on My Mind, Jerry signed on at the same time that Jake did in December of 18. So that's the current lineup as we speak. I will make mention of the fact that Living Like There's No Tomorrow, it was a perfect song for Jake, and I wanted to have it for a single. One of my dear friends was the late Keith Whitley. Keith, of course, had a bluegrass career with Ralph Stanley, then with J.D. Crowe, and then he went on to a great country career that was just really, really exploding when his untimely death at a very young age, 32 or 3. But Keith was my best man when I got married in 1978. Well, when he got his country contract, I was in Nashville, and he happened to see my bus, and he came over, and he said, "You got a few minutes?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Let me play some stuff that I just recorded for RCA." I said, "Sure." Well, one of the first songs he's played was Living Like There's No Tomorrow. I said, "Man, that is a killer song." It didn't take off, but I forgot what the other was that did for him. I just kept that song in the back of my mind, thinking one of these days that I would use it. So we fast forward to when Jake comes in to audition. I could tell that he had a little country vocal influence in his voice. And I said, "You like country music?" He said, "Yeah, I like real country music." I said, "Who you like?" He said, "George Jones and Keith Whitley."
Oh, my.
I said, "You and me going to get along really good, you know." I said, "Sing me a George Jones song." And he sang, I think, an old song called Mama Take Me Home. I said, "Do you know Living Like There's No Tomorrow?" And he started singing it. I said, "Okay, that's going to be your song on the first show, but we're going to do a little different than what you're doing." I just rearranged the vocals and put it in a little higher key, and it did quite well. Still gets a lot of airplay.
And this was the first radio single
Yes.
release.
Uh-huh.
Alrighty. Well, for those who are tuning in and are patiently waiting, let's go ahead and air the first track entitled Living Like There's No Tomorrow, featuring the lead vocals of Jake Vanover from Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver's latest CD, Live in Prague, Czech Republic, released on Billy Blue Records. And it's heard right here on the BluegrassJamboree.com.
You said I'd live to regret it. I said I'll die before I do. Now the pain is gonna kill me if I let it. Has it been a lifetime since I walked out on you? I've been running inside, but living like there's no tomorrow finally got to me tonight. You told me one day I'd be sorry. Now I feel every word coming true. But one thing I've learned in a hurry, freedom is a prison for a fool. Dialing our own number wasn't easy, and it's been hard to admit you were right, but living like there's no tomorrow finally got to me tonight. I've been running with my life wide open, reaching out for whatever's inside, but living like there's no tomorrow finally got to me tonight.
Jake Van Over.
And we're back. You're listening to Hear It Here, heard only on the BluegrassJamboree.com. Once again, I'm Brett Smeltzer, talking on the phone with my featured artist and special guest, Mr. Doyle Lawson. And we're talking about the brand new CD that's been out just for a few months, Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver live in Prague, Czech Republic. We're going to talk about the newest member, Jerry Cole. I love the entire CD, but listening to Jerry Cole, to me, he almost puts me in the mind of hearing a hint of young Russell Moore or a little bit of Joey Lemons, who is of Terry Balcom's Dukes of Drive. So when you hear his lead on Leaving on Her Mind, it sounds like I'm listening to that era of Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver.
Well, that's one reason he got the job, you know, but
Oh, really? Well.
Now, first of all, I've known Jerry for a long time. And Jerry's background, Jerry was born and raised, still living just a little bit northeast of Knoxville, Tennessee. But his father was involved in quartet music for 30 years or so. So he's no stranger to gospel music, which is good for me, and he loves it like I do. But I knew that I wanted Jake to do Living Like There's No Tomorrow. And I told Jerry, I said, tell me a song that you like that's not in my show, because I want to find a song for you to sing that will give you some identity here. And he said, well, I always like that. I leave it on the mind. And I said, well, sing me a little bit of it. And, well, actually, I remember that song. I think Jack Clement, he had quite a career in early rock. I think he was working at Sun Records when Jerry Lee and Elvis were both there. And Jerry sang that. I said, okay, we'll do that. When we got ready to do the single, Jerry said, what do you think about Leaving on the Mind? I said, that's great. Let's go for it. But you're right. Jerry has a powerful voice. I mean, he's a powerhouse. And you're right. He reminds me of Russell, because Russell had that same kind of power in his voice. People seem to enjoy it, and we dropped that as the next single, and we'll see what happens.
Not to be the music historian here, but it was written by Jack Clement. It was actually recorded in 1966 by Bobby Bare, Tom Paul Glaser in 68. Dickie Lee did it in 71. The Statler Brothers did it in 72. Johnny Russell did it in 73, and Charlie Pratt released that on an album in 1966. But you guys do a great bluegrass rendition of this classic song.
It's a great old song, and I was looking for something that would be Jerry's, that he would sing. And when they do that, I pretty much give them free reign to do the vocals the way they want to do them, until it comes to the trio. And my trio is that unmistakable Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver
Yes, sir.
harmonies,
Is this available for digital download, Doyle?
Oh, yeah, iTunes,
Okay.
Of course. iTunes has it. And you log on to DoyleLawson.com, and you can order that, and we can mail it out to you. If the order comes in today, it usually goes out the day after. So
Okay, great. How are things with Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver now that you have this pandemic? I mean, hopefully this will be lifted or gone in a very, very near future. But what plans does Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver have down the road? What plans?
Well, right now, to be honest with you, the entertainment touring world pretty much came to a standstill back in March. Right now, my dates they've all been canceled through June, and we're just kind of riding out the storm like everybody else is, trying to figure out what's going to happen with all this stuff going on. And I think probably July will be affected some with it, but I'm hoping by August that things will be cooking again and we can get on back to work with it. Right now, I think everything is pretty much in the air as to what degree we can do it, because they've woven a tale, and the word is that it's going to be a little different for a while, and I don't know. I'm not a naysayer or am I a doomsday or conspiracy or anything, but there's a lot of things I think that's floating around that you just really don't know what to think. Just keep your head down, ride out the storm, and what I do know is I do know that the good Lord's still in charge.
Yes, sir. Amen to that. I guess the best advice I can give the listeners would be, once we find out that everything is going back to norm, they could just go to your website and check out your tour dates.
Absolutely.
Is that DoyleLawsonQuicksilver.com, or what's the actual?
It's actually DoyleLawson.com.
Okay, gotcha.
At the same time, all the recording that I had planned to do, I put on hold because we just don't know right now what's going to happen. So I called Jerry at Billy Blue, and I said, it's pointless to go in now and spend a lot of money when we're not sure what we can do with it or when we can do what we're going to do. I've just kind of pulled things to a stop right now to wait till all this storm passes, and we'll see.
Well, before we air the last track, Doyle, it was an honor and a privilege to talk with you today. I certainly do appreciate your time. I thoroughly enjoyed the stories. A lot of these stories I had no idea about, so I appreciate you sharing these with myself and the listeners out there. We would love to have you back here on the BluegrassJamboree.com to possibly talk about another album, which I'm sure you have something up your sleeve, but we would love to hear about it. With that said, as I always say to all of my featured artists and special guests, I wish you much success with this album. I wish you and the members of Quicksilver safe travels on your musical ventures. I wish you and your family, as well as the members and families of Quicksilver, to continue to stay safe and well. And thank you once again for being here on the BluegrassJamboree.com.
Thank you, Brett. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, and I wish you and yours all the best. Stay safe and healthy.
And here's a fine bluegrass rendition of Leaving on Her Mind, featuring the lead vocals of Jerry Cole from Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver's latest CD, live in Prague, Czech Republic, released on Billy Blue Records. And it's heard right here on the BluegrassJamboree.com.
Like she did one time. I think my sweet baby's done leaving on her mind. The longer I hold her, the more I can tell my darling's not happy with me. The longer I know that I know her too well, the less love in her eyes I see. She don't hold and kiss me like she did one time. I think my sweet baby's got leaving on her mind. she did one time. I think my sweet baby's got leaning on her mind. She don't hold and kiss me like she did one time. I think my sweet baby's got leaving on her mind. I think my sweet baby's got leaving on her mind.
Jerry Cole.
Well, folks, that wraps up another segment of Hear It Here, heard only on the BluegrassJamboree.com. Tune in and join us again for more interviews from some of your favorite bluegrass artists. I'm Brett Smeltzer, and until next time, take care, be safe, and God bless. So long, everyone.